Hey there, amazing friends! I warmly invite you to join me on this exciting journey by subscribing to my channel, liking, commenting, and sharing my videos. Every like, comment, and share brings us closer together and fuels my passion to create more great content. Your support truly makes all the difference. Thank you for being the heart of this community. The silent crowd and the cracked floor lines, the pale traces of skeleton figures seeping from the house walls. A hollow breeze swept through the neglected corridor, stirring motes of dust into a lazy dance under the flicker of a single overhead bulb. The house, long since abandoned, seemed to sigh with each breath of wind, as though exhaling secrets it could no longer contain. Built on the outskirts of a dying town, it had once hosted a proud family whose fortunes faded as the years bore on. Now only warped floorboards, peeling wallpaper, and an air of profound unease remained. By day, the structure was just another crumbling relic of the region's waning prosperity. But by night, it morphed into something else, an arena of intangible hush, overshadow illusions, a place where watchers claim to see shapes drifting along the walls, half-formed skeleton outlines that emerged from cracks in the plaster like living shadows. Few had the nerve to enter these halls after sundown, yet the legends persisted with a curious consistency. The Watchers, local youth or itinerant ghost hunters, whispered accounts of a silent crowd that inhabited the gloom, spectral forms that never spoke, never moaned, only stared with hollow eyes from the house perimeter, especially near the cracked lines in the floor and walls. Some watchers described them as elongated skeleton figures, so faint you might mistake them for illusions of poor light. But they were not illusions, the watchers insisted, for these shapes carried a faint luminescent glow, an ashen shimmer reminiscent of moonlight on pale bone. According to the watchers, these half-formed apparitions seemed caught in a silent dance, drifting along the cracks as if the fractures themselves were pathways between worlds. And though they rarely displayed aggression, the watchers sensed an oppressive sadness radiating from them, as if each skeleton shape was a remnant of an ancient sorrow no one could name. Local rumor pinned the blame on the house's grim backstory. Decades ago, some said a century, others a mere 50 years, an unspoken tragedy befell the last family who lived here. Stories diverged on specifics. Some watchers claimed it was a plague that wiped out the household in a matter of days, leaving no one behind to bury them properly. Others suggested a monstrous act of violence by one deranged patriarch, culminating in the entire clan's demise. Still more watchers whispered that the house was built upon old ground cursed by an earlier settlement, so the structure itself was doomed from the start. Whichever story one believed, all converged on the fact that the inhabitants disappeared abruptly, leaving behind half-eaten meals, unmade beds, and an intangible hush. Overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions that seem to anchor sorrow into the building's very bones. When the Watchers scoured local records for real documentation, they found only partial references: a newspaper snippet about an unfortunate occurrence at the property, redacted lines in official documents, the entire fiasco overshadowed by illusions, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions. The Watchers concluded that someone had intentionally buried the truth, leaving the house to rot in a hush. Overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions that overshadow the entire region's memory. This vacuum of official knowledge only fueled more speculation. Over time, the Watchers gleaned from old diaries of neighbors that the final occupant was a certain Mr. Walcom, rumored to be an eccentric collector of religious relics and forbidden trinkets. One diary excerpt described him receiving shipments of old bones, human or otherwise, that he allegedly used in some form of arcane study. Another account from a traveling merchant insisted he delivered a battered crate containing something that moaned or whimpered. The watchers interpret illusions, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions. Suspecting this might have spurred the skeleton apparitions. Possibly Mr. Walcom unleashed a phenomenon that anchored the property in intangible gloom. Within the house itself, the watchers note a curious pattern. The cracks in the floor lines appear almost deliberate, forming faint labyrinthine patterns. By day, they seem like typical structural fissures from decades of settling. But at night, under the glow of a single flashlight or the moon's pale beams through broken windows, those cracks take on a different aspect. The watchers claim you can see them glisten faintly, as if each line exhaled a cold vapor that coalesced into the faint outlines of skeleton forms creeping along the walls. Some watchers even reported a sensation that if they stepped on certain cracks, a deeper hush, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions overcame them, like stepping on an invisible threshold. One group of paranormal enthusiasts used chalk to mark each crack's shape, discovering they formed a network that converged beneath the main living room, possibly leading to a sealed basement or catacomb. Yet the watchers found no standard basement door, only an intangible hush, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions that suggested an area walled off or hidden. Often, watchers investigating these skeletal figures recounted an overwhelming sense of sorrow that pressed upon them, as though each ghostly shape carried a fraction of grief so immense it could drown the living. No screams, no moans, just silent, tragic stares from hollow eyes. A few watchers claimed that if you locked eyes with a skeleton figure's gaze, you'd feel your heart lurch, momentarily skipping a beat. The watchers interpret illusions, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions, seeing a parallel to old curses about hearts stopping. So far, no actual deaths occurred among investigators, but the watchers took it as a caution. The deeper you ventured, the more likely the intangible hush, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions might intensify. Indeed, those who pressed further into the darkest corners reported near syncope episodes, sudden blackouts, or an unstoppable wave of dread that forced them to flee. One of the more dramatic tales emerged from a visiting scholar, Dr. Elise Caro, who specialized in old funeral customs. She arrived with a cautious but rational mind, expecting at best some overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions. In her notes, she described the first few rooms as typical of a decaying estate: mildewed furniture, spider-webbed corners, random scuttling of rodents. Then she reached a long hallway near the center of the house. Midway through, she caught a flicker out of the corner of her eye, a pale silhouette sliding along the wall. She turned, expecting to see a reflection from her flashlight, but it had the distinct outline of a skeleton. Dr. Carroll froze as the shape glided from one cracked seam in the floor to another, eventually merging with a larger shape near the corner. The watchers interpret illusions, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions. Dr. Carroll's notes described her chest tightening, tears welling unbidden, as though the figure exuded heartbreak. She attempted to speak, but no sound came from her mouth. The intangible hush, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions overcame her. Moments later, the shape vanished. Dr. Carroll fled the house, shaken by the intensity of an emotion she said was not her own, a borrowed sorrow that pinned her heart. She left the region the next day. Further attempts to document the phenomenon with cameras or sensors frequently failed in key moments. The watchers interpret illusions, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions. equipment malfunctions, memory card corruptions, or inexplicable battery drains at critical times. Still, a few blurred images circulated, hinting at luminescent outlines or silhouettes near cracks in the floor. A faint shape on a wall that might be a stylized skeleton torso or an elongated limb. None were conclusive. Meanwhile, official science dismissed the Watcher's accounts as illusions, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions, spurred by an overactive imagination, a haunting atmosphere, and normal structural phenomena. Watchers remain certain something intangible dwells in that house, forging overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions from heartbreak or ancient ritual. What heartbreak or ritual might anchor these skeleton figures? The Watchers looked back to the rumored occupant, Mr. Walcom, who might have dabbled in necromancy or occultic rites involving bones. A partial ledger discovered in the local library's archives alluded to shipments of ossuary fragments, referencing catacombs from foreign lands. If indeed Walcom stored or manipulated these bones within the house, Watchers guessed he might have performed rituals that bound restless spirits to the property. Overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions. Another angle suggests perhaps these skeleton silhouettes are echoes of plague victims from older times, whose remains were walled up in a hush. Overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions scenario. The Watchers gleaned from cryptic references in diaries an uncertain plague that once swept the region. Possibly the house is built atop a mass grave. That might explain the overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions of skeleton shapes, seeping from cracks in the floor, the literal remains or souls seeking release. Speculation soared further when a small team of watchers discovered a hidden trapdoor under tattered rugs in the central parlor. The Watchers interpret overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions as a potential hidden crypt. They pried it open, shining lights down a narrow stone staircase. A wave of stale air, pungent and laced with old rot, rushed out. The Watchers descended to find a cramped cellar, half filled with debris. The Watchers interpret overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions, describing the presence of strewn bones, though none obviously human on first glance, possibly from large animals or cryptic relics. Yet on one mossy shelf lay small fragments that Watchers recognized as undeniably human phalanges. The Watchers see overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions. This discovery hammered home the notion that some macabre practice had taken place. The Watchers retreated quickly, hearing faint scraping or clattering from deeper in the darkness. None dared proceed. They concluded that the skeleton silhouettes seen upstairs might indeed be tied to these hidden bones. Possibly each crack in the floor functioned as a thin barrier between the living space and an underworld of unrestful remains. As Watchers pieced this puzzle together, a sobering theory emerged that the house foundation was physically cracking due to age or flawed construction, but the cracks also served as metaphysical breaches, letting in tangible sorrow or spectral energies leak upward from the catacomb. The Watchers interpret overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions, as each skeleton figure emerges from the plaster or walls in alignment with a crack. The Watchers guess these silhouettes might be partial manifestations of the neglected dead, craving acknowledgement or release. The Watchers note that each shape moves silently, never mouthing words, only emanating sorrow. Their stares appear hollow, yet Watchers claim they communicate a universal grief. Unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions that weighs on the heart. Some watchers wonder if a ritual exorcism or proper burial might quell them. But fear of unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions keeps them from trying. In time, a small group of watchers mustered courage to attempt a cleansing. They planned a midnight vigil with blessed water, chanting from a local cleric, and the reburial of any discovered bones with proper rites. The watchers interpret overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions as a direct confrontation. On that appointed night, they re-entered the house, braced with candles and a determined hush. Overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions in their hearts. They found the skeleton figures more active than ever, swirling along walls like a silent throng. The watchers advanced to the parlor, located the trapdoor, and descended to gather bones. Each bone felt unnaturally cold to the touch, and watchers reported a psychic wave of heartbreak each time they lifted a fragment. One watcher collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. Another watchers, reciting prayers, pressed on, placing bones in a cloth bag for future reburial in sanctified ground. At one point, shapes in the gloom seemed to converge, forming a half-lucid figure looming behind them. The watchers interpret overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions. Tension soared. They completed the bone retrieval and scurried upstairs. No direct attack occurred, but the watchers felt an unstoppable overshadow illusions of sorrow pressing on them. They scattered holy water around the cracks, chanting for peace. Emerging into the corridor, they discovered that the skeleton silhouettes had multiplied, forming a crowd along the walls. The watchers interpret overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions. Rather than an aggressive display, it seemed a final farewell. Each figure seemed to stand motionless, as if acknowledging the watchers' attempt to free them. The watchers sensed a shift. The intangible hush, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions turned from dread to something akin to relief. Step by step, the watchers carried the bones outside, placed them in a makeshift hearse, and drove them to a local chapel cemetery, where a sympathetic priest agreed to bury them with a simple ceremony. The watchers interpret overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions as a potential resolution. Over the next days, they returned to the house, anxious to see if the skeleton shapes persisted. To their cautious optimism, the phenomenon had diminished significantly. Fewer illusions, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions plagued the corridors. The hush lessened. Some watchers believed the sorrow-laden spirits had found partial rest. Yet a vestige remained, faint glimpses, especially near deeper cracks, as though not all bones had been retrieved or the sorrow not fully abated. In the aftermath, watchers debated if they had truly ended the haunting or merely eased it. Some watchers insisted the intangible hush, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions still lingered, albeit weaker. Others believed the core anguish had been resolved, and that the skeleton silhouettes now roamed only as faint echoes without the lethal heartbreak. Meanwhile, official historians paid little heed, dismissing the Watcher's exorcism as a well-intended but superstitious ritual. Yet among the Watchers themselves, no doubt remained that the synergy of sorrow, decaying structure, and neglected bones had conjured a legion of silent skeleton apparitions. Some watchers see overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions as a cautionary lesson. If tragedy or wrongdoing remains unacknowledged, it can fester into intangible horrors. Over time, the Watchers compile a final record of events. Though the skeleton silhouettes seemed subdued, the Watchers warned that the cracks in the floor lines remained, a testament to the house's precarious foundation. The Watchers interpret illusions, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions, that even after reburial, no absolute guarantee existed that the sorrow was fully dispelled. The intangible hush, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions, might resurface if some fresh tragedy or ignorant tampering awakened it anew. Indeed, a rumor circulated that a new buyer expressed interest in renovating the house into a quaint bed and breakfast. The Watchers shuddered at the thought. They fear overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions might re-emerge, unleashing the silent crowd anew. For now, the estate stands mostly vacant. Overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions, a quiet shell with diminished but not extinguished terror. And so, the silent crowd in the cracked floor lines, the pale traces of skeleton figures seeping from the house walls, ends in partial resolution. The Watchers overcame the darkest throes by reburying the sorrow-laden bones, granting rest to the intangible Watchers. Yet caution remains. This story reminds us that heartbreak, despair, and wrongdoing can anchor themselves in a place, forging overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions that manifest as ghostly forms. The Watchers, having glimpsed those skeleton silhouettes moving along cracked lines, cannot forget the hush, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions that nearly crushed them with sorrow. And they caution any future occupant: to dwell in that house is to risk encountering not just echoes of a tragic history, but the intangible hush, overshadow illusions, unstoppable illusions, overshadow illusions of heartbreak incarnate, still drifting between the walls and floors.